Hey there, folks, and welcome to our fantastic panel on application security. It's called Appsec Security is Everyone's Job, which is kind of a little bit of a homage to Werner Vogels three years ago, I guess it was now, who had the famous quote on stage at Amazon reInvent, where he did say security is in fact everyone's job, but we like to think that AppSec in dev teams, is in fact just inherently everyone's job. And we're joined by some fantastic panelists here today who are going to talk to you about application security. We'll just go ahead and go around, and I'll call on everybody one at a time. If you can just give a one-sentence intro of who you are and what you do, that'd be great. Let's go ahead and start with JB.
Hi everyone, I'm JB, so I'm a former pen tester, Appsec red team engineer, and I was Screen CTO and co-founder, and I joined Datadog in February with the Screen acquisition. And I'm glad to be here tonight. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, JB. Let's go ahead and go with Maril next.
Hi, my name is Maril Vernon. I am a red team operator for Zoom Video Communications. I am also a threat hunter currently for Dark Rhino Security, and I've been in pen testing and OffSec for about 2 years now.
We'll go with Alyssa.
Sure. So, hey, everybody, Alyssa Miller. I am a former developer, a hacker, been in tech for 25 years. 10 of that was as a dev. The other 15, 16 now has been in security. And I'm currently the Business Information Security Officer for S&P Global Ratings.
And certainly last but not least, Ashish. We work together on CNCF stuff. I'm sure everybody here has seen Cloud Security Weekly podcast.
Well, sure. Thanks for having me, Andrew. And as Andrew mentioned, I do a lot of things for the community, but my day job is as a CISO. And when I'm not doing my 9 to 5, I like to call myself, well, not Batman really, but Cloud Security Podcast, which is a live stream podcast that happens every weekend. I get about 10,000 viewership for that. So I'm grateful for the community that is being created for cloud security and looking forward to talking to everyone here.
Thanks, everybody. And we'll just kind of kick off the sort of roundtable set of topics. Again, for the audience, we want to keep this super conversational because you're here with us live in the Dash platform. You can ask any questions you want of our guests as we sort of go through this. If you want to dive deeper on a specific topic, we definitely want to hear from you. So let us know by using the Q&A button inside of that portal there. I'll do my best to kind of keep an eye on the chat and also that Q&A section, but the best way to surface questions is going to be to use the question box. So just to kind of dive in here, I know I spent a lot of time talking about DevOps, DevSecOps, AppSec, etc. Like these things tend to mean really different things to different people. And I think it would be a good to just to spend a minute kind of like setting up some definitions here for like what does AppSec actually mean? Like what do you even think of it as far as how AppSec is different than the way that we've done traditional security and traditional development? Anybody can chime in first.
I think we're all waiting. So I'll pop in right away. I mean, for me, AppSec is really that whole component of what we do that isn't operational security, right? I mean, we can think about everything we do within an organization that is really focused on operations, whether it's vulnerability management, scanning, our production environments, or we're doing things to protect users. AppSec to me is that other thing. It's protecting the stuff that we're building, and it's all about bringing that security conversation into the building of our products and services.
I was going to say, for me personally, I'm jumping in there. So I should probably raise my hand before I answer the question, I guess. The way I was going to say this was, I think for me, I kind of what Alyssa mentioned, I'm going to take a lead from there. For me, primarily working for tech companies has been product security, and it's a lot to do with clarifying that, hey, it's different from compliance. It's not the same. a lot of people kind of confuse, hey, application security compliance. I'm like, maybe not really, but hey, let's talk more about what do we do for product security. So that's what application security means for me.
Yeah, from an offensive.
Go ahead, Maril.
JB, go. I'll go last.
We're raising hands now. We're raising hands.
Yeah, so maybe the typical functions that we find in Appsec will be helpful to help the audience understand. But to me, it goes with ensuring that developers care about security and that what they do it keeping security in mind, with security in mind. Securing design, helping them ask themselves the right questions and ensuring they have some awareness around the risk of what they're building. So application security is really trying to infuse this mindset inside the developers and the people actually building applications. And maybe you talked about DevSecOps, and it's going beyond DevSecOps, because yes, we are entering inside the business logic and what might be the actual business value of the delivered by the application.
Yeah, from an OffSec perspective, I approach it as more of a completely different set of methods and techniques that I would approach, via web application than I would something on-prem, than I would a certain component, than I would a physical building, than I would even a cloud environment. So for me, it's a completely different categorization of vulnerable possibilities and the mitigations you can put on top of those to better protect it. So kind of like what Alyssa said, operational security measures are completely different than application security measures. And I think the fact that we have, CVEs, but we also have the OWASP top 10 kind of pays homage to that, because web apps are a completely different consideration in how you can exploit them and how you should protect them.
Yeah, and I know particularly for some of the roles that folks hold on the team, it is very much about continuing to make the business case for why we need those sort of security efforts at different stages of the application development process. I'm very curious to hear from everybody on this topic. If security is everybody's job, who is actually the ultimate owner of security? Because every company has a different concept of this shared responsibility model, the push and pull between development and security. Maybe this doesn't exist actually in the healthiest organizations that have knocked down all the walls. But what does this idea of ownership and shared responsibility actually mean to each of you?
I was going to say, should we follow the same order? Alyssa, you go first, then I go.
No, you're up now. Go on.
Oh, no problem. So for me, I think the shared responsibility kind of, there is a shared responsibility between us and the development team, but the sole responsibility of security still falls on the security team, just for the reason that if, for example, the organization wants to understand what risk are they exposing themselves to by particular vulnerability that may be in a code or a product, they would not have, I guess, the right information to explain that to the board or to have a broader conversation with other stakeholders, including customers, who may not really understand what cross-site scripting is, but they at least want to understand what the risk is. So I think from that perspective, the final straw for the responsibility of security would lie still with the security team. However, the conversation of how we resolve it is something that is shared across the company, and sometimes even shared across the supply chain for people who may be familiar with supply chain attacks.
So I have to go next because I disagree with Ashish, and that's the goal of the panel, right? We can argue.
Someone disagrees.
So
what about knives out, man?
You know the saying, shared ownership is no one's ownership. So you need to define some ownership here, and I think the responsibility has to go on the developer. And so maybe we can take a counterexample demonstration. It cannot go on the security team because, like, the security team is not able to review the code that every developer is doing. The security team is not scaled enough to review every pull request and to ensure that each time, like, a new dependency or a new database schema or maybe a new DNS endpoint is added, like, it cannot be on the shoulders of the security team. And so that's where it's a bit utopic to say that the responsibility is fully on the developers. But still, that should be what we are leaning towards, because in the end, they are the one making the changes. They are the one taking ownership of what they build, how they build it. And in an ideal world, the developer would be security conscious enough to ensure that they can address and ask the security teams about their fears or the things they don't know, right? And so you don't know what you don't know, so that's why you need security conscious developers, and I think that's part of the security team. It's to help them understand what are the risks, and that's what's difficult here, and where we can come back a bit on the shared ownership. Yes, conscious and trained developers have to receive help from a security specialist.
So now I'm just going to jump in between the two of you, right? Because I'm going to throw it down just a little bit differently. The way I look at it, I like to equate it kind of to like a RACI matrix, which, oh my God, I threw that word out there, right? So who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, who's informed? Yeah. The only two I care about are RNA, right? Who's responsible and who's accountable. I think when it comes to security of anything, security team is ultimately responsible, but our devs, our SREs, they're accountable. Certainly from a security perspective, we're responsible. We have to be the ones to enable them. But now here's the thing that really gets me. And this is what frustrates me with security people, and I'm one of them. When it comes to, we've totally, in my opinion, bastardized this term of shared responsibility, which started in DevOps, right? If we want to come to the party, we got to dance at the party. And that means if I'm going to say developers are going to be accountable for the security of the software, then that means I need to be a part of that too. If I'm going to create this thing, DevSecOps, as security, I need to be accountable for my pipeline being efficient. I need to be accountable for the software being monitored appropriately when it hits production. Those are the things we forget. We're kind of almost arrogant in saying security is everybody's responsibility. Well, what about what they're already responsible for? What's our part in that? And so I think when you break it down, if you do think about like that sort of matrix of here's Appsec, here's system stability, here's your software development pipeline, we all play a part in all three of those, and we all need to have common goals. But still, security is responsible for security. Devs are responsible for that pipeline, and your SREs are responsible for what's going on in production. But everybody is accountable.
Alyssa, would you allow me to take an example of something that for which responsibility shifted, I think, in the past years? If you take quality, 10 or 20 years ago, in most companies, you had a QA team that was like reviewing the job of the developers before it goes in production, right? And maybe that's old school. It was the V cycle, and so in a lot of companies that do like a continuous deployment, it doesn't exist anymore, right? And so who's owning quality now? Those are the developers, because like if you have a company in which you push code on a daily basis, it's very hard to gauge that with a quality team. Again, depend on the product. Doesn't apply to 100% of everyone, but like in the SaaS world, in the modern product development world, that's pretty common. And just like QA went on the shoulders of developers, I see that security is also going on the shoulders of the developers. So that's not making them having an easier job, right? But I think that's how it is, and that's how we foresee that development will only be able to scale and to accommodate the need of today's businesses.
I think it's a good thought, but what you would realize is in an ideal world, to Alyssa's point, it's at the end of the day, what we are providing, we're providing guidance to exactly what you said, JB. And I think we also provide some way of making it easy for the company to take more risk through risk management. But a developer's job at the end of the day is to provide value to the business. And yes, we have included QA in there now. And we all know how great a job do they do in a majority of the use cases. Like I still find a lot of conversations where I'm talking about, hey, what's the unit test for this? And how often do we talk about that? As a concept, it's more like it's gone straight to production. with a very bare minimum unit test. So I definitely agree with you on the fact that it may have some responsibility in, or to actually maybe more Alyssa's point, it's more accountability rather than a responsibility. That's probably the better word for it. So thank you for introducing me to that word, Alyssa. But I definitely feel, I don't think it's something that can be shadowed something within the development role. Imagine talking to a business person or the business and going, actually, you know what, from this point onwards, responsibility of security, as well as the QA, as well as the way they provide business some value by creating applications, all developers. Not that I don't care if we don't have a job, that's completely fine. But I think there's asking too much for people, unless it gives them a pay rise, I guess.
Yeah, from my perspective, there's several conflicting schools of thought about who's ultimately responsible for security. You've got, depending on how your organization is set up, you could have, everyone under the CTO or the CIO, which is obviously operations and logistics and the SOC and the actual deployment and operation and maintaining teams, all your sysadmins and stuff and analysts. And then you've got your chief risk officer or your chief privacy officer or your chief security officer, and security could be under those people. So unfortunately, mostly the function of a security team is to come up with the policies and the administrative controls and to govern how security should operate. But we could say it would be most secure of us to have a firewall to protect all of our data. And at the end of the day, it's up to a totally separate team whether or not we implement that firewall, how it's implemented, how it's maintained, how often it's updated, who's got keys to it. So it's kind of inaccurate to say that security is ultimately the responsibility of the securities team, because there is a security function to just about every job within most organizations, which is why, my old org had a lot of what Alyssa is. We had a lot of BISOs. There was a BISO in just about every department who was aware, hey, you are the single point for this department of the security aspects to your job and the part that you play in the overall governing of our security. And you're going to make sure that your department's adhering to all these things that we say that you should do. And then additionally, it was on the security team to make sure that these things are being tested and verified and improved. But ultimately, it fell onto the CIO to accept risk on behalf of the company, and it fell on the CRO, the chief risk officer, if there was an information security breach and information was leaving the company. So, I really, truly believe that security is kind of everyone's job, because developers are supposed to make something work. And administrators and sysadmins are supposed to maintain a system. They are not necessarily the ones in charge of the data or how securely we treat it. And at the same time, if your security team is a reporting body and a testing body and a monitoring body, they can't actually remediate anything, then how is that also their responsibility?
I was gonna ask a follow-up question for Maril in particular, because you're sort of on the implementation end of things as a red teamer, right? You bring problems to development teams and you ask them to close them out as likely the result of some red team exercise. So that's where kind of the rubber meets the right is whose job is it? It's the job that I assign this ticket to close out this bug, right? So I think a lot of organizational structure kind of dictates that, kind of depending on the place that you work. And I think that the very fact that we have rules like BISOs and things are sort of this healthy evolution of that sort of change in accountability and a change in how we're triaging these issues and how we're assigning them inside of organizations.
No, that's absolutely true, because we tell developers all the time, as a red teamer, I go, listen, you're not a security professional. This isn't your job. I'm a security professional. It's my job to know how something that you make can be abused and how to protect it. I don't expect you to have all the knowledge you have and have all the knowledge I have and to do both of our jobs. So as red teams, we do a lot of working with the SOC on alerts and how fast they're responding. The DFIR teams on whether or not we have active alerts and, active detections in an environment and how much our visibility is and how good our digital forensics are. And then we're also working with developer teams to say, listen, this is vulnerable to this because you did not, make this parameter secure. You're referencing an insecure module. You left tons and tons of dead code in this thing where we can hide bad shit or bad things. So, it's really working with a number of different teams and really is depending on what the thing it is we found and how we abused it, the responsibility could fall on a totally different party to make sure that the organization is well mitigated against it.
Yeah, and see, this is an important conversation because honestly, you know, as we look at that, it's that working together piece that we often miss, right? It's so easy for security, and it has been for the 2 decades that I've been dealing with this, throwing it over the wall, and hey, now it's your responsibility. And that's where, you know, at the end of the day, we're still the ones that we have to drive that security strategy, right? And so, you know, I mean, to take Maril's point and even build it further, it's not just policies and procedures, it's that overall strategy. How are we going to address security? But then how we go about that and who's accountable for implementing it is where things change, right? And I mean, I tell people all the time when I started this role as a BISO, yeah, I expected that my job, okay, great, I'm heading cybersecurity for this entire division of S&P. Great. Well, I'm going to have to get that security culture built, and that means advocating for security practices within the division. What I didn't realize was that the majority of my time would be advocating the other way, advocating on behalf of the business back to the security team. How do I get the security team to align what it is that they're doing, their initiatives, their goals, their policies, procedures, everything, get that aligned so that it actually supports and enables the business and encourages the business to grow, rather than being those quality gates that stand in the way, the big heavy feedback cycles that then, you know, threaten to push the development pipeline backward, or at least, you know, increase the size of our backlogs. How do we get security plugged into the phases of the pipeline rather than the gates in between? And that's where I think the rubber really hits the road, especially when we're talking DevOps, or especially as we're moving into CI/CD, where, yeah, we're doing deploys every hour maybe. If we're thinking we're going to put long feedback cycles of security gates in there, we're sorely mistaken. But at the end of the day, it's the CISO is going to get called on the carpet if there's a breach or if something of that nature happens. We've seen it time and again. So I think still the responsibility falls to security ultimately because we drive that strategy, but then that accountability, we're the ones who are specifying, okay, here's how we're going to enable you as developers to be accountable yourselves with self-service models and that sort of thing to do the security thing that we want you to do.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
I
at
think
the end of the day,
you go.
Okay, it says at the end of the day, you know, we can advocate for implementing security and we can say like, this is the most secure way to operate. And it is more cost effective for the organization to implement security, you know, throughout the process rather than at the very end, because oftentimes security is seen as the no department. Like, no, you can't just deploy that to go live. We haven't tested it yet. Or no, you can't just do this or no. And like at the end of the day, the organization can do those things anyway. But it is up to us to at least inform them. This is how you should be operating in a reasonably secure manner because, you know, bringing that GRC aspect into it, if there is a breach, our cybersecurity insurance is going to say, well, were you operating in a negligent manner? Were you aware of the security concerns? Did you take that into consideration? And we can say, yes, we did say that. We did tell them. But at the end of the day, you know, companies still have to operate. They have to move forward, which is why it's up to someone to determine what level of operating risk the organization can sustain to keep operations flowing and incorporate security as much as is feasible.
And I think so. One key way to have a clear view on such risks is what we called the paved road, and that was like popularized by Netflix. And so the paved road is basically saying, okay, developers are using those tools on their daily life, on their daily work. We want, as a security team, to ensure that the most tools they are used in a safe way. Okay, so they are using that kind of database. Okay, let's ensure that we know that the ORM, for instance, they are using to address the database is safe. It's not fully safe, then maybe we can patch it. Maybe we can build a gate in the CI that will warn the developers if they are using the helper that we know is vulnerable or is easily mistaken. And you have the same for everything. Like, okay, you create a S3 bucket, please use our helper, it will go faster, and the S3 bucket will be safe by default. And by combining all of those things, you can provide a safe way for developer to use several of their tools. And the path that is easy to take forward is, okay, the developers are introducing a new tool. Okay, let's work with the security team, or let the security team find out and ensuring how we can actually secure and help the developers to do a safe job.
I would say that's an ideal world. That's a security utopia. That is all the teams working together, and developers care about security and they want to integrate those things and know how to use these tools. Because unfortunately, at the end of the day, what you see a lot of is you have 3 months to get this out and working, and pen test before go live or not, we don't care. We're putting the portal on the website or whatever. And so developers just usually have to concentrate on getting that done, because all of these considerations take time, which is a resource away from those developers doing something else. But I would love to see that.
Maril, you're so skeptical. Oh my gosh, but actually I agree. But here's the thing, and this is why, so let me take that paved road thing for a moment, because I love the idea of the paved road. But here's how you address what you were just talking about, Maril, and this is to the heart of what I'm advocating as well, is yes, we want to strive for that paved road, but we also have to allow and actually encourage innovation that paves new roads. So yeah, we see the tools they're leveraging today. We know that they can leverage it in this way. It'll make things more secure for them, and we'll do it frictionlessly, which, even the idea of being frictionless is probably a bit of a pipe dream. But the reality is, from a security perspective, you're hearing this word from me a ton, accountability, right? It's that trusted accountability where, all right, we've done enough to enable you. We've set clear standards. We've set clear expectations from a security perspective. We've got the right metrics in place. And so, yes, this is the mark of a mature application security program. But now our engineers are entrusted that they can actually pave a new road, maybe with a new tool, with a new technology, understanding that they have to achieve a certain level of security and that that's a part of what they're being held to. And that's where we start to see, all right, now that issue of tight timelines and pushing things and how that whole dynamic where business versus security and business is always going to win, that's how we start to get security still into that conversation. But it's culturistic, right? I mean, to your point, Maril, I don't blame you for being a skeptic here. It's it takes a lot of maturity to get there, and that's where we just, as security people, we have to be more willing to take on our level of responsibility in that pipeline as well, and not just think that we can dictate security and walk away.
Absolutely. It's a lot of crossing the lines, and it's a lot of, I'd rather sit down with you and explain to you how we work and where this came from and how we're not trying to make more work for you. We're just trying to, again, build and integrate that security culture. So, because if security is even a consideration in most of what they're doing, that will already yield so many more benefits than if security is like a 2 week before go live consideration.
I think this is you're all amazing panelists, by the way, because you just keep handing off to each other. It's almost like I don't need to moderate this panel. So it's a great segue, right? Because I like to say these days, and I'm a bit of an optimist when it comes to Appsec, that we have more tooling and we have more opportunity to actually be good at security than ever before. Especially like in a cloud reality, we have more things that are accessible for companies to adopt good security posture, like kind of by design and by default. It's just kind of a question of where you are on that maturity curve. I'm curious though to hear from all of you if you think there's a new challenge that's not presently being addressed by current Appsec culture. So we know that like there's a lot of things like top 10 kind of things that result in breaches, right? Like misconfiguration, credential leaks, like these are all common things that we see in the headlines that we know about. But is there anything that you're looking forward and saying, you know what, like this is a risk that we're going to be talking about, 3 years from now that's not in our present top 10 list? And we'll start with Ashish because you've been kind of quiet here.
No, I think I appreciate the the opportunity. I was going to say the main challenge that I normally, or at least the one thing that I'm hoping people would talk more about is how we as a security community have accepted false positive as a great way to not include security into like a CI/CD pipeline. I'll explain a bit more on this. So traditionally, a SAS tool, like a static code analysis tool, has been known to produce a lot of false positive. But when we talk about DevSecOps and security automation, the first thing we think about is software composition analysis. So because it's the easiest to implement. And I personally, when I started my previous role, not this one, but the one before that, when I got my budget, the first thing I started, you know what? I want to train developers on how to do the code the right way. Instead of using training as a first option, I decided to go down the path of using a SaaS tool. And oh my God, that was a bad decision. Because the amount of false positives you get, and you go, this is like, how are we as a society, as a community, accepting the fact that we can have tools that produces so much false positive and say we want to go with the same speed as a DevOps team and implement that in CI/CD. So one of the challenges that I feel is going to definitely be hopefully addressed, and maybe more we talk about it, the more it's going to happen, is SAST as we know it is going to evolve into a lot more. I think there's a few projects already in place. I think SemGrep and GitHub CodeQL are some of the newer forms of doing static code analysis, where it's not all about, hey, I'm going to do a regex pattern match to hopefully find something which is 99% of the time false positives. So someone in my team has to spend hours looking at it. That's probably the main challenge that I probably hope I don't have to think about moving forward.
I love what you're saying, Ashish. False positive wasn't an issue like 20 years ago, right? And because they were directed at the security team, and the security team is able to sort apart the false positives and the true positives. It's not easy, but they were able to do it. And now that we are injecting those tools into CI/CD, we don't have a choice, because the developers, they will not accept the tools if they are producing false positives. And so I join you, Andrew, on the fact that you're an optimist. I'm also an optimist in Appsec, and that's why we built a screen over the past 6 years. But like, we struggle building something that was not creating false positives. And you mentioned SemGrep. I think that's also the philosophy behind those modern tools. Like, do something that the developers can take into account and that the developer will trust. You have no false positive. Without that, you cannot hand over something to the developer team.
Yeah, there's no doubt tooling is a challenge. And when it comes to what I see on the horizon, I actually see multi-cloud being a huge security risk for us going forward. And it might sound kind of crazy, because I know a lot of people are leveraging multi-cloud already as a way to think about like availability and other stuff. There's a lot of things that are driving multi-cloud right now, right? Certainly there's the idea of cost optimization. There's this idea of availability, not being vendor locked and things of that nature. But now we're starting to see even regulatory concerns that are driving a multi-cloud strategy, where we've got growing privacy regulations in particular that are demanding that if you're a global company and you're storing data on their citizens, you have to store that data in their country. So if AWS or Azure or GCP or whoever doesn't have a region in that country, now suddenly you're looking at being forced into some form of multi-cloud strategy. Maybe it's just that you have multiple vendors, but mature organizations aren't looking at that. They're looking at, how do we run active in multiple clouds? How can I, on a moment's notice, swing a application that I'm hosting in AWS over to my Alibaba region that I have over in China, for instance? And so the challenge in this is all of that needs to be seamless, and that includes the governance and the oversight of it, which is where security comes in, right? So we've got all this tooling. How do most people build, the security tooling into their cloud environments? Well, they go to the AWS store and what's available there, which tools are in there. And now we're looking at either we need tools that span and can, provide the same level of coverage across our various cloud providers, or what we're seeing more is we need to take processes and maybe other tooling that abstract the tools that sit at that lowest level. So if we're doing things like CloudWatch or whatever, cloud configuration management we're doing, container security, all of those things, they've either got to cover across, or we have to have the processes that allow us to be flexible but abstract that scene back to our devs, to our SREs, everybody who's ultimately responsible for remediating those vulnerabilities that we're calling out to them. And so I see that move to multi-cloud accelerating, and with that, security once again is going to be behind the 8 ball to come up with a good strategy for how we handle our tooling as a part of that.
I think the challenge over there is definitely going to be the trust factor to Alyssa, what you mentioned. And obviously, I want to add one more to the multi-cloud reason is just egos in general, because someone in the organization has a credit card and they just don't definitely want to use Google Cloud. So I'm going to swipe my corporate credit card and go for Google Cloud. I'm not talking about a previous organization that I worked with. So if they're listening, I don't hate you guys. So the way I see that, it is going to be an ongoing challenge. But I also find that there are, and I'm going to be a bit more optimistic in this context, where yes, there are people who are making choices which are multi-cloud, but there are organizations, or at least it's fostering an environment where a lot of people are coming up with platforms which already come with security. Like as a security team, we are able to work with, define what platform or platform as a service, which is local to the organization, where irrespective as a developer, I don't have to worry about where am I putting my code in? Am I putting my code in Google Cloud, Azure, AWS, IBM, Oracle Cloud? Like now, I did not think Oracle Cloud was going to win, but somehow, to your point about the location thing, Saudi Arabia is the only country with one cloud service provider, which is Oracle Cloud, and they all are on Oracle Cloud. I found out about this recently. I'm going, what? So great strategy from Oracle Cloud. So just saying, let's go with the Oilers. So keeping that in mind, I definitely agree with you on the challenge of multi-cloud. And I think from a developer perspective, if you kind of bring it back to the Appsec piece, I feel it may make it easier. It may be challenging for us as security folks for multi-cloud for sure, but from a developer perspective, I think it will become easier for them because we would be asked to simplify it for them, so they don't have to worry about where the application is going.
I think it's interesting as we sort of go through this sort of move to multi-cloud, and I like to tell people, like, if you have the privilege of being in business long enough, you will have multi-cloud. Like whether you want it or not, even if it's a small presence, you will have some sort of multi-cloud thing. Like you'll either have GCP because you're doing, like G Suite thing, and you have to onboard parts of Google Cloud to do security automations around that, or you'll end up if you're a primary AWS, you might end up having Azure Active Directory and the O365, so you have all this additional surface area. And as we do this, I think that there's an ebb and flow here in the business that goes on itself. And if you watch me talk at other conferences, I'm a big fan of Kelly Shortridge. I don't know if anybody else here watches Kelly Shortridge or reads the blogs, but she talks a lot about the InfoSec phases of grief. And I think that companies go through this where they're like, oh yeah, we're definitely never going to be multi-cloud, even though they're probably already multi-cloud. They go through the denial stage. And eventually they get to this phase where they're doing things like continuous auditing, which is kind of more the acceptance phase. Where you accept that some mistakes are going to happen and that you probably can't prevent everything that's ever going to go wrong in CI/CD. Some people just call that trust but verify, but I prefer to call it acceptance. But I'm curious what you're seeing in terms of organizational growth, and I like to reference this maturity curve, right? So when we talk about things like DevSecOps, we rank organizations on this maturity sort of scale, right? Like where are they, and how much of this have they embedded in shift left, but then also how much have they embedded in their team culture, and how much have they embedded in this idea that there is production mistakes, mistakes will make it to production. How do we acknowledge when they make it to production, and then how do we remediate them rapidly rather than just deny that that's ever going to happen? Maril has been pretty quiet thus far, and I'm sure that you have some thoughts about mistakes that make it to production.
Yeah, I've got some thoughts, but I think as the offensive person, it's best when I go last and we hear from the people actually implementing these things before I just come along and ruin everyone's parade with how I would break it.
Oh, so now you want us to jump in so that you can trash us when we're done. I that's what I heard. Well, I'll give this a go, because honestly, this is one of the important pieces. And here, if you want justification for what I was saying before, that security needs to be responsible for making the pipeline better and pipeline more efficient, here's a reason why. We know that things are going to get through. The more mature, and for most organizations, mature means we're doing faster and faster deploys. So how many deploys are we doing per week? How are we reducing works in progress? All the things that we're tracking in a DevOps world. Security needs to be a part of that, because we need those fast turnaround times. So if I've got a strong CI/CD pipeline and I can drive my enhancements through quickly, that also means I can drive my issues through quickly. So if I find something in production, I can remediate that quick. That is a huge level of risk reduction when I know that, okay, I can, maybe even consciously, now here's the scary one, security people, I can consciously let a vulnerability go through. I don't have to break the build. I can let it go through because I know that my pipeline is strong enough that as long as I put that P0 into my backlog, it's going to come up in the very next deploy and it's going to be fine. And it's going to get fixed. So I think that level of resilience and being able to deal with it that way, that's why we need to be such strong partners in improving our pipelines.
I agree. And
I'll probably
I
add
think
from a
that's
maturity perspective, I'll probably put developers adoption as one of the key metrics for the maturity as well. To Alyssa's, just to take that further, the feedback loop is really important for us to identify the mean time to detect something, mean time to respond to something. However, and I think it's been the theme of this conversation so far as well, the developer adoption of the tool in a way that it's easy for them and doesn't take away from their normal job. I think I see a lot of tooling and process. What happens is you kind of go on the side channel and go, oh, don't worry about us. We'll be on the side on a parallel track to you. You go ahead in production. We'll be in a parallel track to you guys. And you almost feel like that's not the right way to approach it, especially when it's already gone into production and you're kind of hoping for, I guess, some form of parallel CI/CD pipeline to kind of kick in at that point, and you kind of have like this, I guess the negative feedback loop, if I want to use that word. But I definitely find that developer adoption and with a strong CI/CD pipeline is a great sign for maturity, because you get to detect quickly, respond quickly. Also, because the tooling itself supports the developer workflow already, it's a no-brainer for anyone. It's not like, hey, I'm going to go take this side channel path. Can you come back and have a look at this as well when you're done with your production thing? That's not going to work. So for me, maturity is definitely developer adoption has a huge part in there.
Like we're in the bargaining phase now. Yeah. We're like, how many bugs can we send to production? I'm just wondering, what is like a minimal acceptable number for this now?
So just
that's security 101.
We only have less than 2 minutes left. So let's wrap this thought up.
I would just say that from the offensive perspective, again, things are going to get through. We're all humans. Not everyone who's building something or deploying something or maintaining something is a security expert. But that's where, speaking of security maturity, security in layers is so important. Security is everyone's responsibility, because it should not be on one person or one department or one executive. If there's a single point of failure for anyone's security program, that's great news for me and horrible security. Don't do security that way. So I think the more layers you have, the more things you have behind, if there's a few bugs in a portal, fine. But what you've got behind that portal, the API calls, how you can lock that down, permissions and access control and things like that, those things can save you. Even if someone does manage to find a few vectors in, their vectors to pivot and escalate might be severely, really limited. So, do multi-layer security, do multiple things in the cloud. If the cloud has it native, enable it. And if it doesn't, find a solution you can put in front of it. Don't just trust the built-in AWS WAF. Put another WAF in front of it. It should have a DMZ too. Things like this. So I think that, you can secure all these things from people like me, regardless of if bugs get through or not.
Well, with that, we have about 30 seconds left. So I just want to thank everybody, all the panelists, for being here. We had some great engagement in the chat, though no questions came in. We got lots of comments. This is a great talk, great panelist discussion. Lots of I agree with the panelists. So certainly topics resonated with the audience. Thanks for being here, and thanks for being a part of Datadog Dash. And hopefully see you in person at Dash 2022.